June 7, 1963. Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz with $47 in his pocket. 6 months later, he owned Harlem again. Everyone said it was impossible. 11 years in America's most brutal prison. His empire stolen, his men scattered, his enemies stronger than ever. But what they didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had spent every single day of those 11 years planning this moment. This is the story of the greatest comeback in criminal history. The story of how a 56-year-old ex-convict with $47 turned nothing into everything in just 180 days. To understand what Bumpy accomplished, you need to understand what he lost. When Bumpy went to Alcatraz in 1952, he was the undisputed king of Harlem. He controlled the numbers racket from 110th Street to the Bronx. He had 200 men on his payroll, 5 policy banks, and protection deals with half the cops in Manhattan. Bumpy's organization was bringing in $50,000 a week. That's over $500,000 in today's money. Every week, he owned nightclubs, restaurants, and had politicians in his pocket. When Bumpy Johnson spoke, Harlem listened. But 11 years is a lifetime in the criminal world. While Bumpy counted days in his Alcatraz cell, vultures circled his territory. The Genovese family moved in from downtown. Local hustlers carved up his policy banks. His lieutenants either died, disappeared, or switched sides. By 1963, Marcus "Smooth" Henderson controlled most of Bumpy's old territory. The man Bumpy had mentored, trusted, and protected, had made a deal with the Italians. In exchange for revealing Bumpy's operations, Smooth got to keep 125th Street for himself. But here's what everyone missed. Prison didn't break Bumpy Johnson. It educated him. Alcatraz wasn't just America's most secure prison. It was America's most intellectual prison. Bumpy found himself surrounded by the country's smartest criminals, tax evaders, con artists, bank robbers who'd planned heists like chess games. While other inmates lifted weights or started fights, Bumpy started a different kind of education. Robert Birdman Stroud taught him about patience and systematic thinking. Mickey Cohen shared insights about media manipulation and public relations. Al Capone's former accountant, serving time for tax evasion, explained modern business structures and cash flow management. For 11 years, Bumpy read everything he could get his hands on: philosophy, psychology, military strategy, business theory. He studied Sun Tzu's Art of War until he could recite it from memory. He analyzed every mistake that led to his downfall, every weakness in his old organization. But the real education came from watching prison politics. Alcatraz was a microcosm of power dynamics. Bumpy observed how alliances formed and dissolved, how respect was earned and lost, how smart leaders built influence, not through violence, but through indispensability. Most importantly, Bumpy learned patience. The young man who went to prison was impulsive, emotional, sometimes reckless. The man who walked out was calculated, strategic, and absolutely terrifying in his precision. Every night for 4,015 nights, Bumpy lay in his cell and refined his comeback plan. Not just how to regain his territory, but how to build something better, something that couldn't be destroyed by a single arrest or betrayal. June 7, 1963, 3:47 p.m., the prison boat docked at Pier 33 in San Francisco. Bumpy Johnson stepped onto mainland America for the first time in over a decade. He wore the same gray suit he'd been arrested in, now 2 sizes too big. In his pocket, $47 in release money and a train ticket to New York. He didn't call his wife Mamie, didn't contact any old friends. Instead, he bought a newspaper and sat on a bench overlooking the bay. For 2 hours, he read every article about New York, about Harlem, about the changes he'd missed. The civil rights movement was exploding. Malcolm X was preaching in Harlem. The neighborhood was changing, and Bumpy understood that his old methods wouldn't work in this new world. The comeback would require evolution, not just restoration. That night, on the train to New York, Bumpy made his plan. Not a rough outline, not general ideas. A detailed step-by-step strategy for reclaiming his empire. And it started with something nobody expected. He was going to surrender. June 10th, 1963. Bumpy arrived at Penn Station at 6:23 a.m. He took the subway to Harlem, walked to his old apartment on Edgecombe Avenue, and knocked on his own door. Mamie nearly fainted when she saw him. They'd written letters, but seeing your husband after 11 years of prison ages a woman in ways you can't prepare for. Bumpy spent exactly 2 hours at home. He showered, changed clothes, ate breakfast, and kissed his wife goodbye. "I'll be back for dinner," he said, "and when I come back, everything will be different." At 9 a.m., Bumpy walked into Small's Paradise Restaurant, the same place where he'd later confront Marcus Henderson. But this wasn't about confrontation. This was about intelligence. Junie Bird was waiting, 63 years old, gray-haired, but still sharp as a razor. For 11 years, Junie had been Bumpy's eyes and ears on the street. Every month, he'd written letters disguised as family updates. But between the lines, he was reporting on territory changes, new players who could be trusted and who couldn't. "Give me everything," Bumpy said, sitting down. For 3 hours, Junie laid out the new landscape of Harlem crime. Who controlled what corners, which cops were clean, which were dirty, who owed money to whom. Most men would have been discouraged. Bumpy's old empire was completely dismantled. But Bumpy saw something else. He saw opportunity. See, when predators fight over territory, they create weaknesses. Marcus Henderson was paying tribute to the Genovese family, which meant he was constantly looking over his shoulder downtown. The smaller operators were suspicious of each other. Nobody trusted anybody. But there was one thing all of them had forgotten. They'd forgotten about loyalty. Bumpy's first move was brilliant in its simplicity. He didn't try to reclaim territory. He reclaimed people. June 12th, 1963. Bumpy walked into Willie Fish Jackson's barber shop on 135th Street. Fish had been cutting hair in Harlem for 30 years, knew everyone, heard everything. When Fish saw Bumpy, he nearly dropped his scissors. "Mr. Johnson," Fish whispered, "we heard you were back, but we thought you'd lay low for a while." Bumpy sat in the barber chair. "Cut my hair, Fish, and while you do, tell everyone who comes in that Bumpy Johnson is taking appointments. Anyone who worked for me before, anyone who remembers the old days, anyone who's tired of being somebody else's second choice." "And if the new boys hear about this?" Fish asked. Bumpy smiled that cold, terrifying smile. "I hope they do." Word spread through Harlem like wildfire. Bumpy Johnson was back, and he was recruiting, but he wasn't offering territory or immediate money. He was offering something more valuable. He was offering respect. For 3 days, men trickled into Fish's barbershop, old numbers runners who'd been pushed out by Henderson's crew. Policy bankers who were tired of giving tribute to the Italians. Muscle, who remembered when Harlem was run by Harlem people. Raymond Quick Lewis was first. Then Willie Jackson himself. Then Bobby Blue Williams, who'd been Bumpy's best enforcer before the arrest. One by one, the old guard came home, but Bumpy's masterstroke wasn't rebuilding his old organization. It was building something better. June 16th, 1963. Bumpy called his first meeting. Not in a back room or basement, in broad daylight, at Marcus Garvey Park, where anyone could see. 15 men showed up. 15 men who'd once been kings in their own right, but were now paying tribute to outsiders. "Gentlemen," Bumpy began, "for 11 years, you've been working for other people. Italians who see you as muscle, hustlers who see you as competition, politicians who see you as problems. I'm here to offer you something different." He paused. "Let them lean in. I'm here to offer you partnership." This was revolutionary. In 1963, criminal organizations were strictly hierarchical, bosses on top, soldiers on bottom. But Bumpy proposed something different, a confederation. Each man would control his own territory, but they'd share intelligence, resources, and protection. "We're not going to fight the Genovese family," Bumpy continued. "We're going to make them irrelevant. We're not going to destroy Henderson's operation. We're going to make him come to us." The plan was elegant. Instead of direct confrontation, Bumpy's confederation would offer better services, better odds on numbers, more reliable protection, fairer treatment of local businesses. But the genius was in the economics. By pooling resources, they could offer things individually none of them could afford: professional accounting, legal protection, political connections. The Confederation operated like a legitimate business consortium. Each member contributed 10% of their weekly take to a common fund. This fund provided emergency bail money, legal fees, and startup capital for new ventures. More importantly, it provided something that had never existed in Harlem's underworld: job security. If a member got arrested, the Confederation continued operating his business and supporting his family. If someone got muscled out by larger competitors, the Confederation provided backup and resources to fight back. If a member wanted to expand or try new ventures, the Confederation provided funding and expertise. This wasn't just criminal organization, this was criminal innovation. Within 2 weeks, Bumpy's Confederation had grown to 25 members. Within a month, 40. They weren't just getting the desperate and the forgotten. They were attracting successful operators who saw the benefits of unity. July 4, 1963. Independence Day. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone when Bumpy held his largest meeting yet at the Audubon Ballroom. 67 men from across Harlem, representing every major operation except Henderson's. That's when Bumpy revealed the full scope of his strategy. "We're not just taking back our territory," he announced. "We're changing the game entirely." Phase 1 had been recruitment. Phase 2 was about to begin: economic warfare. Henderson's operation depended on volume. He needed thousands of small bets to generate the cash flow for his tribute payments. But what if those bettors had better options? Bumpy's Confederation began offering unprecedented odds. Instead of 600 to 1 on a number hit, they offered 800 to 1. Instead of keeping winnings for 24 hours, they paid immediately. Instead of muscle collecting debts, they offered credit and payment plans. The Confederation also introduced customer service innovations that seem obvious now, but were revolutionary then: scheduled pickup times for bets, discreet delivery of winnings, professional dress codes for runners, complaint procedures for disputes. They treated illegal gambling like a legitimate business, and customers responded. Henderson's daily take dropped by 30% in the first week. By August, he was struggling to make his payments to the Genovese family. But Bumpy wasn't finished. Phase 3 was psychological. August 15, 1963. Henderson walked into Small's Paradise for his usual Friday night dinner. Bumpy was waiting at table 8, right next to Henderson's regular table 7. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't threatening. He was just there, calm as Sunday morning. That's when Henderson understood. Bumpy wasn't coming for him with guns or threats. Bumpy was coming for him with something worse: inevitability. Every day, Henderson's operation grew weaker, while Bumpy's Confederation grew stronger. Every week, more of Henderson's people quietly switched sides. The writing was on the wall, and everyone could read it. The psychological pressure was deliberate and devastating. Bumpy would show up everywhere Henderson went, never threatening, never confrontational, just present. A constant reminder that the old king had returned and was patiently waiting for the pretender to step down. Henderson's men began making mistakes, missing collections, showing up late, forgetting procedures they'd followed for years. The stress was eating the organization from the inside. September 2nd, 1963, exactly 3 months after walking out of Alcatraz, Bumpy Johnson received a call. Marcus Henderson wanted to meet. They met at the same place where Bumpy had first recruited his Confederation, Marcus Garvey Park. Henderson came alone, no bodyguards, no backup. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 3 months. "What do you want?" Henderson asked. "Nothing," Bumpy replied. "I've already taken everything that matters." Henderson understood. His organization was hemorrhaging money and men. The Genovese family was asking questions he couldn't answer. He had 2 choices: war with Bumpy Johnson or exile from Harlem. "If I leave," Henderson asked. "You leave, rich and alive," Bumpy said. "Take your savings, go to Philadelphia, start fresh. No one follows you, no one bothers you." It was a generous offer, and both men knew why. Bumpy had learned from his Alcatraz education that destroying enemies often creates more problems than solving them. Better to eliminate threats through opportunity than through violence. Henderson took the deal. By September 10th, he was gone. December 7th, 1963. 6 months to the day after walking out of Alcatraz with $47, Bumpy Johnson sat in his new office above Small's Paradise. His Confederation controlled 80% of Harlem's numbers racket. His weekly take was higher than it had ever been before his imprisonment. But more importantly, he'd built something sustainable, not a one-man empire that would collapse without him, but a network of partnerships that could survive and thrive independently. The Genovese family, recognizing they'd lost the economic war, approached Bumpy for a new deal. Not tribute, not submission, but mutual respect and non-interference. They would stay downtown. Harlem would police itself. Bumpy had accomplished what everyone said was impossible. Not just a comeback, but an evolution. He'd taken the hard lessons of prison and turned them into the foundation of something bigger and better than what he'd lost. The boy from South Carolina who'd arrived in Harlem with nothing but anger and ambition had become something else entirely. A strategist, a businessman, a leader who understood that real power doesn't come from fear, but from making yourself indispensable. That $47 in his pocket when he left Alcatraz, Bumpy kept that exact $47 in his safe for the rest of his life, not as a reminder of where he'd been, but as proof of what was possible when you combined intelligence, patience, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Years later, business schools would study Bumpy's Confederation model. The idea of competitive cooperation, shared resources, and mutual protection would become standard practice in legitimate industries. But in 1963, Harlem, it was pure innovation. This is why they called him the Godfather of Harlem, not because he was the most violent or the most feared, but because he understood something that most men never learn. True power is the ability to make your enemies irrelevant without firing a single shot. If this story of strategy, patience, and the ultimate comeback inspired you, smash that subscribe button. Drop a like if you believe that intelligence beats violence every time. And in the comments, let me know, could you have waited 11 years to execute the perfect plan? Next week, we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson's Confederation outlasted the Mafia, the FBI, and every other challenge that tried to break it. You don't want to miss that.